Hi all, we are the students of Marine College Kuttikaram from the Department of BA Applied Economics. Today we are going to discuss the topic History and Origin of Fundamental Rights and Duties in the Indian Constitution. So let's move on to the video.
Introduction. Fundamental rights. Fundamental rights are a group of rights that have been recognized by a high degree of protection from encroachment. These rights are specifically identified in a constitution or have been found under due process of law. Laws encroaching on a fundamental rights generally must pass strict scrutiny to be upheld as constitutional. Some universally recognized rights that are seen as fundamental that is contained in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or the UN International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights include the following: right to self-determination, right to liberty, right to due process of law, right to freedom of movement, right to privacy, right to freedom of thought, right to freedom of religion, right to freedom of expression, right to peaceful assembly, right to freedom of association. Fundamental duties. The fundamental duties are defined as the moral obligation of all citizens to help promote a spirit of patriotism and to uphold the unity of nation. These duties set out in Part 4A of Constitution India concern individuals and the nation. Like the directive principles, they are not enforceable by courts unless otherwise made enforceable by parliamentary law. These are statutory duties not enforceable by law, but a court may take them into account while adjudicating on a matter. The idea behind their incorporation was to emphasize the obligation of the citizen in exchange for the fundamental rights that he or she enjoys. History and origin of fundamental rights in India. The development of constitutional guaranteed fundamental human rights in India was inspired by historical examples such as England's of Right 1689, the United States of Rights approved on 17th September 1787, final ratification on 15th December 1791, and France's Declaration of Right of Man created during the Revolution of 1789 and ratified on 26 August 1789. In 1919, the Rowlatt Act gave extensive power to the British government and allowed indefinite arrests and detention of individuals, warrantless searches and seizures, restriction on the public gatherings, and intensive censorship of media and publications.
Indians who were seeking independence and their own government were particularly influenced by the independence of Ireland and the development of the Irish Constitution. Also, the directive principles of state policy in Irish Constitution were looked upon by the people of India as an inspiration for independent India's government to comprehensively tackle complex social and economic challenges across a vast, diverse nation and population. The task of developing a constitution for the nation was undertaken by the Constituent Assembly of India, composed of non-elected representatives. The Constituent Assembly first met on 9th December 1946 under the temporary presidency of Sachidanand Sinha. Later, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was made its president. While members of Congress constituted a large majority of the Assembly, Congress leaders appointed persons from diverse political backgrounds to positions of responsibility for developing the Constitution and national laws. Notably, Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar became the chairperson of the drafting committee, while Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel became chairpersons of committees and subcommittees responsible for different subjects. A notable development during that period having significant effect on the Indian Constitution took place on 10th December 1948 when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and called upon all member states to adopt these rights in their respective constitutions. The fundamental rights were included in the first draft constitution, February 1948, the second draft constitution, 17th October 1948, and final third draft constitution, 26th November 1949, prepared by the drafting committee. History and origin of fundamental rights in the world. Documents asserting individual rights such as the Magna Carta of 1215, the English Bill of Rights 1689, the French Declaration on the Rights of Man and Citizen 1789, and the US Constitution and Bill of Rights 1791 are the written precursors to many of today's human rights documents. Contemporary international human rights law and the establishment of the United Nations have important historical antecedents. Efforts in the 19th century to prohibit the slave trade and to limit the horrors of war are prime examples. In 1919, the countries established the International Labour Organization to oversee treaties protecting workers with respect to their rights, including their health and safety. Concern over the protection of certain minority groups was raised by the League of Nations at the end of the First World War. However, this organization for international peace and cooperation, created by the victorious European allies, never achieved its goals. It finally died with the onset of the Second World War on 1939. The idea of human rights emerged stronger after World War II. The extermination by Nazi Germany of over 6 million Jews, Sinti and Romani gypsies, homosexuals, and persons with disabilities horrified the world. Governments then committed themselves to establishing the United Nations with the primary goal of bolstering international peace and preventing conflict. People wanted to ensure that never again would anyone be unjustly denied life, freedom, food, shelter, and nationality. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Member states of the United Nations pledged to promote respect for the human rights of all. To advance this goal, the UN established a Commission on Human Rights and charged it with the task of drafting a document spelling out the meaning of the fundamental rights and freedoms proclaimed in the Charter. The Commission, guided by Eleanor Roosevelt's forceful leadership, captured the world's attention. On December 10, 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights (UDHR) was adopted by the 56 members of the United Nations. The vote was unanimous, although 8 nations chose to abstain. The UDHR, commonly referred to as the International Magna Carta, extended the revolution in international law ushered in by the United Nations Charter.
History of fundamental duties in India. There was no fundamental duties chapter in the Constitution that came into effect on 26 January 1950. That being said, there was a silver of India's constitutional tradition, mainly Gandhian, that talked about the fundamental duties. Gandhi had said, "The true source of rights is duty. If we all discourage our duties, right will not be far to seek." Narayana Agarwal gave this line of thinking a constitutional avatar in the Gandhian Constitution of Free India 1946. The Gandhian Constitution conjoined the fundamental rights and fundamental duties. After laying down fundamental rights, it goes on to say that all these rights shall be conditioned on the performance of the following fundamental duties. This approach of conditioning of rights to the performance of duties is quite rare in Indian constitutional thinking, including the formal constitution making process. Apart from 1 or 2 instances where members of the Constituent Assembly echoed Gandhian idea on rights and duties, we find no evidence that suggests that the framers of our constitution seriously considered adopting something that resembled fundamental duties in the constitution, even if had moral and political convictions about the importance of duties. In contrast, we find that fundamental rights are given immense constitutional importance in both historical constitutions and the Constituent Assembly debates. So, how did fundamental duties become part of the Constitution? They were added through 42nd Amendment in 1976 in the middle of emergency as Part 4A by Indira Gandhi. She set up a committee chaired by then External Affairs Minister Sarwan Singh to study the question of amendment of the Constitution in the light of experience. The All India Congress Committee suggested to Sarwan Singh Committee to formulate some proposals for the inclusion of the Constitution certain fundamental duties and obligations which every citizen owes to the nation. The committee then drew up a list of fundamental duties which included the duty to adhere into the Constitution, uphold India's sovereignty and contribute with national service, among other things, which the Congress party tweaked. Interestingly, the Congress rejected the committee's proposal to give Parliament the power, by law, to impose punishment and penalties on citizens who don't adhere into the fundamental duties. By November 1976, Both houses of parliament passed the 42nd Amendment, which included a few fundamental duties chaptered to the constitution containing 10 duties. In 2002, one more duty was added to the list. It said that every citizen who is a parent or guardian to provide opportunities for education to his children, or as the case may be, what between the age of 6 and 14 years.
History of fundamental duties in the world. The fundamental duties are defined as the moral obligation of all citizens to help promote a spirit and patriotism and to uphold the unity of the country. In the Indian Constitution, the idea of fundamental duties are taken from the USSR Russia Constitution. The fundamental duties are essentially taken from the Indian tradition, religious and practices. Essentially, these were the duties and the codification of tasks integral to the Indian way of life. The addition of fundamental duties in our constitution have brought our constitution aligned with Article 29 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and with various provisions of the modern constitution of other countries.
The fundamental rights play a very significant role in the life of any citizen. These rights can defend during the time of complexity and difficulty and help us grow into a good human being. And that's why all the rights are the needs of people. Despite their non-enforceability, fundamental duties are the essence of a democratic state like India. A democratic state can't survive when their citizens are not willing to take an active part in governance and assuming responsibilities for the best interest of the country. Many of these duties are now incorporated as separate law and are enforceable by the law. But that doesn't diminish the value of these duties mentioned in Article 51. The best part is the word fundamental before duties. It gives equal status against fundamental rights and can be correlated. Thank you.
Okay, guys, we have seen the history and importance of the fundamental rights and duties in the Indian Constitution. So let's wind up the video and thank you for watching.